Ember's eyelids snapped open like the shutters of a broken airlock, letting in a sliver of blinding light that felt more like a slap than a welcome. Cryogenic sleep, they said. Like waking up in a dream, they promised. Liars. All of them. Her mouth tasted like someone had been cooking with engine degreaser, and her head pounded with the rhythm of a forgotten nightclub. Welcome back to the land of the living, a voice as soothing as nails on a chalkboard chimed in. Or whatever this is. Thanks, Ember croaked, her voice like gravel being dragged over a rusty grill. She sat up, or at least she tried. In reality, it was more of a flail that resulted in her sprawling awkwardly out of the cryopod, graceful as a malfunctioning bot. She was surrounded by aliens. Literally. Little critters with eyes like saucers and skin that shimmered like oil on puddles. Not one to shy away from the obvious, she said. Well, this isn't my usual Monday morning. They didn't laugh. Tough crowd. One of the aliens, who seemed to be the head honcho, or at least the one wearing a hat, stepped forward. Greetings, Teacher Ember. We have awaited your awakening. You and me both, buddy, Ember grumbled, rubbing her temples. Mind telling me why I'm on A? Whatever this is, we are on sacred comet Thraxes, the alien leader said with a reverence that implied she should be impressed. She was not. Comet. Great. So not only am I light years from the nearest decent cup of coffee, but I'm also stuck on a flying ice cube, the alien leader continued, undeterred by her sarcasm. You are here to educate us, the Zeril, on Earth's history and culture, right? Because that's clearly the most pressing issue in the galaxy right now. Ember folded her arms, partly to look defiant, but mostly because she was cold. Damn cryo chill. Did you skip the part where you ask first? The alien tilted its head, a gesture she assumed meant confusion. We believed you would be honored. Oh, I'm honored, all right. Nothing says prestige like being kidnapped by a bunch of. Zeril, was it? A chorus of nods from the assembled aliens. Indeed, Teacher Ember. We seek knowledge. If it's trivia night you want, you've got the wrong human, she said, eyeing the room which looked more like a kindergarten classroom than a sacred ritual site. Tiny desks, colorful drawings on the walls, and a faint smell of orange juice. Why me, though? There's gotta be better teachers out there. Your credentials were suitable, the leader explained, though its hesitation suggested otherwise. You have taught the younglings of your kind, Ember snorted. Yeah, but they're not usually green and wobbly. The curriculum involves Earth's most significant achievements and failures. We wish to learn from them, failures. Oh, you're in luck. Humans are masters of those, Ember laughed without humor. Where do I start? Wars, pollution, reality TV. Yes, the leader said eagerly, all of them great. She was about to become the worst history teacher in the universe. I hope you've got a sick leave policy. The leader gestured to a wall that shimmered to life, showing a distorted map of Earth. This is your first assignment. Explain the importance of this British Empire. Ember stared at the map. Oh boy, colonialism. This'll be fun. She looked at the eager faces, hoping her sarcasm didn't translate across species. Well, the British Empire was kind of like the galaxy's first big attempt at a bad roommate situation. The Zeril blinked, probably trying to comprehend the analogy. They went around sticking flags into places and saying, "This is yours now," much like how you all decided to kidnap me. The Zeril leader looked pleased, as if she just complimented their method. We understand. Acquisition by declaration. Sure, let's go with that, Ember muttered. We humans are big on taking things that aren't yours and then acting like we're doing everyone a favor. The alien students were scribbling down notes furiously with multi-tentacled appendages. It was endearing in a they might dissect me later kind of way. So, what happens if I just refuse to teach? I mean, I'm not exactly here by choice, she asked, more out of curiosity than rebellion. The leader gave a soft clicking sound which might have been laughter. We return you to sleep. Forever, oh lovely. The old cooperate or else strategy, always a motivational classic. The leader gestured to a small, ugly chair. Please continue. Ember eyed the chair suspiciously before lowering herself onto it. It creaked under her weight, which was more than a little insulting. Okay, where were we? Right, British Empire. So they had this habit of showing up uninvited, claiming resources, and generally being a pain in the arse. The Z-Real nodded along, their attention unwavering. It was almost flattering. And then there were the revolutions. People tend to get testy when you try to run their lives from thousands of miles away. She paused, considering. Kind of like how I feel right now, another symphony of frantic scribbling. So after a bit of a kerfuffle, the whole empire thing fell apart. Turns out people like running their own lives. Who knew? The alien in the hat tilted its head again. Kerfuffle, trouble, chaos, a big all mess. You know, the usual state of humanity. Ah, we see, great. So what's next? You want to hear about the Romans, or maybe the delightful history of nuclear weapons. The leader turned to confer with another alien briefly before looking back at her. We would like a demonstration, Ember blinked. A demonstration? Of what exactly? Of your most significant cultural rituals. Cultural rituals, huh? You mean like Pizza Fridays or binge-watching terrible TV? The leader didn't flinch. Precisely right. So we're skipping the pyramids and going straight to Netflix. This is going well, she remarked dryly. Okay, how about this? Humans gather in groups to stare at screens for hours watching other humans do things. It's a communal activity, oddly hypnotic, fascinating. And what do these screens display? Mostly pretend stories, sometimes real ones. Often it's just trash meant to make us feel better about our own lives. Not unlike this scenario. A few of the Z-Real actually chuckled, or at least she hoped it was a chuckle and not a precursor to something more sinister. All right, kids, any questions? Tentacles wiggled in what she assumed was an eager gesture. Yes, you with the, extra eyeball. She pointed vaguely. Teacher Ember, why did your people not learn from their past mistakes? A million responses flitted through her mind, most of them unsuitable for a classroom setting, even an alien one. Well, that's the big mystery, isn't it? We're stubborn. Or maybe just really, really optimistic. You see, Earth is full of contradictions. The Z-Real seemed to ponder this, their eyes reflecting thoughts unfathomable. Or maybe they were just wondering what was for lunch. Remember, history is like a bad meal. You might regret it later, but it's important to know how you got indigestion in the first place. The leader nodded solemnly. Your metaphorical wisdom is appreciated. Metaphorical wisdom. I'll have to remember that one, Ember said with a wry smile. All right, I think I'm done for today. How about a nap and maybe some real food? We shall provide sustenance. Teacher Ember. Splendid. Can't wait to see what qualifies as food around here. As the Z-Real led her away from the makeshift classroom, Ember couldn't help but marvel at the absurdity of it all. Waking up on a comet, surrounded by aliens eager to learn about humanity's finest and foulest moments. It was either the best job she'd ever had or the weirdest. Possibly both. At least it wasn't Monday. Ember found herself seated at what passed for a dining table on the comet, though it bore more resemblance to a repurposed cargo crate. The Z-Real seemed to take their decor cues from a minimalist who hated furniture but loved confusion. Around her, the aliens tweeted and clucked, sliding trays of weirdly colored slop in front of her. Bon appetit, she muttered, poking at the luminous mush with a suspicious finger. What is this? Alien tapioca. The Z-Real made a noise that was probably laughter. It is a delicacy on Thraxes. Nutrient-rich, rich. It looks like someone barfed a rainbow, Ember replied. The Z-Real stared blankly, clearly not understanding her brand of humor. She sighed, taking a reluctant bite. It was like chewing on a rubber band marinated in fruit punch. It didn't taste half as bad as it looked, but that wasn't saying much. I should have asked for a side of fries. As she ate, her eyes wandered over the room. The Z-Real were a busy bunch, hustling around with the purposefulness of ants on a sugar rush. Yet amid the commotion, she caught snippets of conversation, if you could call it that, and noticed something odd. A few of the younger ones seemed less engaged, their eyes darting around, their tentacles twitching with unspent energy. Her curiosity piqued. Ember leaned towards the nearest Z-Real, one whose eyes seemed to flicker with a hint of rebellion. So, what do you guys do for fun around here? Besides kidnapping unsuspecting teachers, I mean. The young alien, a bundle of nervous energy, blinked its multitude of eyes. Fun, yeah, fun. Entertainment, hobbies. What makes life on this comet worth waking up for? The Z-Real hesitated, a glimmer of something almost human flickering in its gaze. We study, learn, and serve the leader. It is our purpose. Ember rolled her eyes. Sounds like a blast. Ever thought of rebelling a bit? Maybe mix it up with a game of alien hopscotch. The alien glanced nervously around, lowering its voice to a conspiratorial whisper. We are not supposed to speak of dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction. Now there was a word she could get behind. Trust me, kid, I'm familiar with the concept. The alien's eyes darted to the leader, who was preoccupied with a particularly spirited discussion about the virtues of human literature. Some of us. We wonder if there is more to existence than learning and serving. Should I be worried you're gonna stage an alien uprising? Ember asked, half joking, half hopeful. At least that would be interesting. The young Z-Real made that clicking sound again, which Ember was beginning to associate with amusement. We wouldn't know where to begin. Story of my life, she said, waving her spoon like a wand. But hey, I'm here all week. Maybe we'll come up with something. The alien bobbed its head, and Ember could swear she saw it smile, or at least its version of a smile. It was hard to tell with all the eyes and tentacles. Their moment was interrupted by the leader's voice, cutting through the din like a knife through stale bread. Teacher Ember, we wish to continue our education. We shall perform a ritual to demonstrate our culture. Ritual, huh? As long as it doesn't involve sacrificing the human, I'm game. The leader looked puzzled. Sacrifice is primitive. We are advanced. Well, that's a relief, Ember deadpanned, setting down her spoon. Lead the way. The Z-Real shuffled her towards a larger chamber which was as featureless as a blank slate, save for a series of intricate symbols etched into the floor. They formed a circle, with Ember plopped in the center like an unwitting actor on an alien stage. So, are we summoning something? A demon, perhaps? Or just some good all-cosmic energy? The leader tilted its head as if considering whether she was serious. This is our unity ritual. It strengthens our bonds and reaffirms our purpose. Ah, good. I was worried I'd have to dance, Ember quipped, earning another round of confused looks from the Z-Real. As the ritual began, the Z-Real started chanting in a language that sounded like a mix between whale song and a broken synthesizer. They swayed in unison, tentacles raised, eyes closed, a sea of tranquility in stark contrast to Ember's skepticism. She wished she could feel the same serenity, but instead, she was acutely aware of the growing tension in the room, a dissonance between the rhythmic chanting and the furtive glances exchanged among the younger aliens. They were going through the motions, but their hearts weren't in it. She knew the look, she'd seen it in plenty of classrooms back on Earth. Is this supposed to be doing something? She asked, breaking the solemn atmosphere like a hammer to glass. The chanting halted and the leader gave her a look that might have been annoyance. It is a sacred tradition, right? Sacred, Ember repeated, struggling to keep her tone in check. But what's the point if not everyone's on board, huh? The leader's eyes narrowed, a subtle warning that she was treading dangerous ground. Our traditions are not to be questioned. Sure. I'm just saying maybe it's time to rethink your approach. Maybe try a karaoke night instead. The younger Z-Real stifled their amusement, their eyes gleaming with the thrill of defiance. The leader's posture stiffened, a sign that Ember had pushed her luck far enough. You are here to teach, not to disrupt. Teach, disrupt, they're practically the same thing, Ember shrugged. But hey, who am I to judge? The ritual resumed, though Ember could feel the shift in the room's energy. The younger Z-Real's curiosity had been piqued, their desire for change simmering beneath the surface like a volcano waiting to erupt. She knew the feeling all too well. As the ceremony concluded, one of the young Z-Real approached her, its eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement. Teacher Ember, could you tell us more about how humans? Rebel, what you mean besides complaining about Mondays? Ember said, crossing her arms. Sure, humans are great at rebellion. We do it all the time. Sometimes just for the hell of it. The alien leaned closer, its curiosity now palpable. How does one start? Well, it usually begins with someone realizing that the status quo is a load of crap, Ember said, lowering her voice. Then they find others who feel the same way. Next thing you know, there's a revolution on your hands. The Z-Real glanced around nervously, as if expecting the leader to materialize and smite them on the spot. And what if it fails? Then you do what humans always do. You pick up the pieces and try again, she replied with a shrug, or you find a new way to stick it to the man. The young alien nodded, a flicker of determination in its eyes. Thank you, Teacher Ember. We will remember your words, just be careful, okay? Revolutions are messy business. Trust me, I've lived through a few. She gave the Z-Real a conspiratorial wink. But sometimes, messy's what you need to make things better. The young alien slithered away, leaving Ember alone with her thoughts. She couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction, knowing she might have just planted the seeds of change on this lonely comet. As she wandered back to her quarters, Ember mulled over the day's events. The Z-Real were an odd bunch with their rituals and rigid customs. Yet beneath the surface, they were just like humans, yearning for something more. Maybe, just maybe, she could help them find it. When she reached her quarters, she collapsed onto the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling with a mixture of weariness and amusement. Who knew I'd end up starting an alien rebellion, she murmured to herself. Guess there's a first time for everything. And as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a lot more interesting on sacred Comet Thraxes. Ember sat cross-legged on the floor of her classroom, a room that was about as welcoming as a sterile operating theater. The Z-Real were arrayed in front of her, their eyes wide with anticipation, like the world's weirdest yet most attentive kindergarten class. She glanced at her blackboard, a slab of polished meteorite, where she'd scrawled the day's lesson, Earth's revolutionary movements. So, she began, tapping the board with a piece of chalk she'd fashioned from some of the comet's less edible minerals. Once upon a time on Earth, people got sick of the way things were and decided to shake things up. It happened a lot. Keeps happening, actually. It's kind of our thing. The Z-Real hung on her every word, their attention unwavering. If only she'd had students this attentive back when she was teaching Earthside, where the only thing more distracting than tick-tock was the kid in the back row who wouldn't stop eating glue. What's a revolutionary movement? Piped up one of the younger Z-Real, its tentacles twitching in eager curiosity. Great question, Ember said, leaning back against the cold wall. Essentially, it's when people get together and go, bugger this, we deserve better. Then they do something about it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but hey, it's the thought that counts. A chorus of clicks and clacks swept through the room as the Z-Real processed this new concept. Ember couldn't help but smile at their enthusiasm. She never thought she'd be teaching aliens the fine art of sticking it to the man. Can you give us an example, Teacher Ember? Asked another Z-Real, its eyes glimmering with a mix of fear and thrill, like a kid about to sneak their first beer. Oh, there are plenty, Ember replied, counting off on her fingers. The French Revolution, where the peasants decided they'd had enough of fancy wigs and cake. The American Revolution, where a bunch of colonial rebels got tired of paying taxes on tea. And let's not forget the digital revolution, where everyone decided they'd rather live online than deal with actual people. As she spoke, Ember noticed the young Z-Real from the day before, the one with the glint of rebellion. It was watching her with an intensity that bordered on unsettling. She decided to push it a bit further. See, revolutions start because someone dares to ask why, why are we doing things this way when it's clearly not working? She said, her tone casual but her words laced with subtle challenge. But what if the leader disapproves of questioning? One Z-Real asked, its voice quivering. Oh, leaders never like questions, Ember said with a sardonic grin. But that's how you know you're onto something. If it makes them uncomfortable, you're probably asking the right questions. The Z-Real exchanged nervous glances, their whispers a symphony of apprehension. It dawned on Ember that she might be walking a razor's edge, but like any good teacher or bad influence, she pressed on. Look, I'm not saying you should go and start a coup, Ember added, trying to sound diplomatic. But there's value in examining the status quo. You can't improve things if you're too afraid to ask why they aren't perfect. Is that why humans have so many revolutions? Asked the rebellious Zeril, its voice a low, conspiratorial hum. Partly, Ember admitted. We're not content with just accepting things. We challenge stuff, we rebel, and sometimes we even manage to make things better. Or at least different. The young Zeril nodded, its eyes alight with a dangerous mix of curiosity and ambition. A perfect little revolutionary in the making. But not everyone was on board with Ember's impromptu class in insubordination. Out of nowhere, the leader of the Zeril materialized, its presence as subtle as a brick through a window. Teacher Ember, the leader intoned, its voice a cold stream through the warmth of the room. We have been observing your lessons with great interest. Ah, the cosmic equivalent of we're monitoring your calls. Yes, leader. Ember said, feigning innocence. You like the part about the French and their distaste for cake. The leader's many eyes blinked in unison, a gesture that was not unlike a lizard's blink, slow, deliberate, and a shade too thoughtful. We are concerned that your teachings may disrupt our harmony. Disrupt? Ember echoed, playing dumb. I'm just sharing some history. You know, cultural exchange and all that jazz. The leader's eyes narrowed, suspicion etched into every crease on its alien face. Your words carry seeds of discord. Discord's a great band, Ember said, shrugging. But seriously, history's full of lessons. Some pleasant, some not. Can't cherry-pick the nice bits, can we? Your role is to educate, not incite, the leader warned, its voice now carrying the weight of authority wrapped in velvet threat. I'm just telling stories, Ember replied with a nonchalant wave. But hey, if they spark a few questions along the way, isn't that the point of education? Questions are permissible, the leader conceded, albeit reluctantly. But questions that lead to unrest will not be tolerated. Duly noted, Ember said, locking eyes with the leader. I'll keep it PG, promise. The leader lingered for a moment, its presence as heavy as a looming storm cloud before slipping away. The room exhaled collectively, the tension dissipating like steam. Teacher Ember, are we in trouble? The rebellious Zeril asked, its voice tremulous. Nah, just a friendly little chat, Ember assured, though she wasn't entirely convinced herself. But it's good to know where the line is. Just don't trip over it. The rest of the lesson carried on in a more subdued manner, but the excitement was palpable. Ember could feel the undercurrents of change, the subtle shifts in attitude, as the Zeril began to question things they'd previously accepted as immutable. When the lesson finally ended, Ember found herself alone in the room, a strange sense of satisfaction settling over her. She'd never intended to become an alien revolutionary figurehead, but sometimes life throws you a curveball, or in her case, a comet. As she prepared to leave, the young Zeril approached her once more, its eyes filled with a determination that was both heartening and terrifying. Thank you, Teacher Ember, for opening our eyes. Just doing my job, Ember replied with a wink. Remember, though, revolutions aren't all fireworks and glory. Sometimes they're just a different kind of mess. The Zeril nodded, absorbing her words with the eagerness of a sponge hitting water. We understand. But we must try. Trying's half the battle, Ember said, clapping the Zeril on the shoulder. The other half is knowing when to duck. With that, she left the room, her mind a whirl of thoughts and possibilities. This was supposed to be a simple teaching gig, a way to pass the time until she could get back to Earth. But now it felt like she was on the brink of something bigger, something that could change not just her life, but perhaps the lives of an entire species. Back in her quarters, Ember collapsed onto her bed, exhaustion weighing her down like a lead blanket. She could only imagine what tomorrow would bring. Another lesson, another confrontation with the leader, a full-scale Zeril rebellion. Whatever it was, she'd face it with the same irreverent humor and determination that had gotten her this far. Because if there was one thing she'd learned from all those revolutions on Earth, it's that sometimes change is just a snarky comment away. and as she drifted off to sleep, the last thought on her mind was a mix of excitement and dread. The kind of feeling you get when you're about to jump off a cliff, hoping the parachute opens. "Welcome to the revolution, I guess," she mumbled, allowing sleep to finally claim her. The next morning, Ember awoke with a start, immediately regretting the night's sleep-depriving thoughts of impending doom. She rubbed her eyes and stumbled out of bed, preparing herself for another day of cosmic pedagogy. As she navigated the cold, sterile corridors, she couldn't help but notice the subtle tension in the air. The Z-Reel moved with a nervous energy, their clicks and clacks muted like whispers in a library. It seemed her little history lesson was having ripple effects she hadn't quite anticipated. Upon entering the classroom, Ember was greeted by the usual group of eager Z-Reel, but this time there was a new energy among them, a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. "Morning, class," Ember said, her voice a mix of cheeriness and sarcasm. Ready for another thrilling episode of Earth's Greatest Hits? A ripple of clacks echoed through the room, the Z-Reel equivalent of nodding heads. "Today, we're going to talk about the Industrial Revolution. Spoiler, things got loud, dirty, and a bit out of hand. Kind of like a rock concert with more coal dust." As she continued her lesson, Ember noticed the Z-Reel absorbing every word, their eyes gleaming with newfound determination. The younger ones, especially, were listening with an intensity that was both inspiring and a little scary. She shifted gears, diving into the details of how industries transformed human society, how innovation was a double-edged sword, bringing both progress and pitfalls. And as she spoke, she made sure to pepper her narrative with plenty of humor and cynicism. "See, when humans invent new things, we have this annoying habit of not thinking things through," Ember quipped. "We get all excited about the shiny new toy, forget to read the manual, and next thing you know, we've got smog and child labor. But hey, that's progress, right?" The Z-Reel responded with a mix of amusement and horror, the kind of reaction you'd get from someone watching a nature documentary about an animal that eats its own young. "Any questions?" Ember asked, wrapping up her lecture with a flourish. "Did the humans ever fix their mistakes?" asked one of the younger Z-Reel, its eyes wide with curiosity. "Sort of," Ember replied, scratching her chin thoughtfully. "We invented regulations, labor laws, and environmental movements. But it's a work in progress. Like a painting that's never quite done." The Z-Reel nodded, digesting her words with an eagerness she couldn't help but find endearing. Despite the danger of planting revolutionary ideas, it felt good to share the messy, complex truth of human history. And maybe, just maybe, it would help the Z-Reel forge their own path. As the class ended, the leader appeared once more, its expression unreadable as ever. "Teacher Ember," it said, its voice measured and calm. "We have been contemplating your teachings." "Well, I'm all for deep thoughts," Ember replied, crossing her arms. "Just don't hurt yourself." The leader blinked slowly, clearly unamused. "We find your lessons intriguing. Perhaps we too must consider new ways of thinking." "Well, look at that," Ember said with a smirk. "I'm converting more than just the students." The leader's eyes narrowed, but there was a glimmer of something almost like respect in its gaze. "Change is complex, but perhaps you are right. Change is scary," Ember acknowledged. "But sometimes it's the only way forward." The leader nodded, its demeanor softening ever so slightly. "We shall see, Teacher Ember." As the leader departed, Ember leaned against the doorway, a sense of cautious optimism washing over her. Maybe she was making a difference after all, one snarky quip at a time. And as she stepped into the corridor, she couldn't help but chuckle. Who knew teaching aliens would be so revolutionary? Ember stood at the crossroads of a revolution she never intended to start, like a sleepwalker who'd somehow managed to wander onto the front lines of a war. As she ambled down the cold, metallic corridor of the sacred comet Thraxes, she mulled over her predicament. Teaching aliens about Earth's revolutionary history was one thing. Inadvertently inspiring them to start their own was a whole different ballgame. Note to self: next time, Stick to discussing cute Earth animals or something equally benign," she muttered under her breath, casting a sideways glance at a Z-Reel who was scuttling past, trying its best to look inconspicuous. Given that it had all the subtlety of a rhinoceros in a china shop, it wasn't doing a great job. Ember was scheduled for another class in an IOR, but she had a nagging suspicion there were things happening that needed her attention more urgently. She decided to do a bit of sleuthing. After all, it wasn't every day you got to play detective on a comet. She turned down a side passage, her footsteps echoing ominously in the silence. The Z-Reel didn't believe in unnecessary decorations, or warmth, or comfort for that matter. Everything was functional and as welcoming as a tax audit. She spied a familiar Z-Reel, the one who'd spoken up in class yesterday. It was whispering to a small group in a hushed tone that had all the cloak-and-dagger subtlety of a middle school secret club. Ember approached, her curiosity piqued. "Meeting about the latest episode of Z-Reel Got Talent," she quipped as she drew nearer. The group froze, their eyes darting like kids caught with their hands in the proverbial cookie jar. "Teacher Ember," the young Z-Reel exclaimed, clearly caught off guard. "We were just discussing your lessons." "Discussing, huh?" Ember leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Is that what you kids are calling plotting a rebellion these days?" The Z-Reel exchanged worried glances, their discomfort palpable. Ember sighed, realizing she was treading a line as thin as a politician's promise. "Look, I'm not here to rat you out," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But just remember, revolutions aren't all sunshine and rainbows. More like thunderstorms and mudslides." "We know," the young Z-Reel replied, its voice filled with youthful determination. "But we can't ignore what you've taught us. We want to think for ourselves, to make decisions for our future." Ember rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of unintended consequences pressing down on her shoulders. "Thinking for yourselves is good. Just don't forget to think about what comes after. It's easy to tear things down, much harder to build something better." The Z-Reel nodded solemnly, their determination undeterred. Ember was struck by the irony. She'd spent years trying to get apathetic students on Earth to care about history, and now she had a group of aliens ready to turn it into a call to arms. "All right," she relented. "Just promise me you'll be careful." The leader isn't exactly the forgiving type. The young Z-Reel's gaze was steady. "We will." Ember pushed herself off the wall, feeling the burden of knowledge settle like an unwanted guest. "All right then. I've got a class to teach. Try not to start anything before lunch, okay?" With that, she turned and continued down the corridor, her mind a storm of conflicting emotions. How had a simple teaching gig turned into interstellar activism? She'd have to tread carefully, balancing on the tightrope of education and insurrection. The classroom was just as sterile as ever, but there was a buzz in the air, a sense of anticipation that Ember couldn't ignore. As she stepped inside, she was met with a room full of eager eyes, each one reflecting a spark she'd unknowingly lit. "All right, class," she said, putting on her best breezy demeanor. "Who's ready for another thrilling chapter of humanity's greatest hits?" The Z-Reel clacked in response, their eagerness barely contained. "So today," Ember began, "we're diving into the civil rights movement." It was a time when people realized, hey, maybe treating each other like dirt isn't the best idea. Spoiler. It involved a lot of marching, chanting, and stubborn old bastards not wanting to change. The Z-Reel listened with rapt attention as she recounted stories of courage and defiance, of people standing up against injustice despite the odds. As she spoke, Ember couldn't help but notice the parallels. Sure, the Z-Reel weren't exactly oppressed humans, but there was something universal about the desire for change. And the best part, Ember concluded, a wry smile on her lips. Even when they made progress, it was only the start. Change is slow, messy, and often looks like a step backwards for every two forward. Kind of like trying to walk a hyperactive puppy on a leash. The classroom erupted in clacks and clicks, the Z-Reel equivalent of laughter. Despite herself, Ember felt a small sense of satisfaction. Maybe, just maybe, She was helping them find their way forward, which was more than she could say for most of her previous jobs. As the class wrapped up, Ember noticed the young Zreal from earlier lingering behind. She arched an eyebrow, waiting for it to speak. "Teacher Ember," it began hesitantly, "we were wondering, would you help us?" Ember blinked, the question catching her off guard. "Help you? With what exactly?" The Zreal shifted uncomfortably, its eyes darting to the doorway before returning to her. "With speaking to the leader. We want to ask for change, but we're not sure how." Ember paused, weighing her options. She was no diplomat, just a teacher with a knack for sarcasm and a taste for dark humor. But maybe, just maybe, she could help them find their voice. "I can try," she replied slowly, "but no promises, okay? I'm not exactly on the leader's Christmas card list." The Zreal's eyes widened, its excitement palpable. "Thank you, Teacher Ember. We won't forget this." As it scuttled away, Ember sighed, feeling the weight of responsibility settle like a lead balloon in her stomach. She'd gone from educator to instigator, and now she was adding mediator to the list. "Guess I'm a regular Swiss Army knife of bad decisions," she muttered, making her way back to her quarters. She'd need to prepare for the encounter with the leader, which was bound to be as pleasant as a root canal. Back in her room, Ember flopped onto her bed, staring up at the ceiling. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was hurtling towards something bigger than she'd imagined, like a tiny comet on a collision course with a planet. She closed her eyes, trying to calm the whirlwind of thoughts. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, and she'd need every ounce of her wit to navigate the political minefield she'd stumbled into. As she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. Who would have thought that teaching aliens would end up being more of an education for her than them? "Welcome to the revolution, indeed," she murmured, letting sleep claim her once more. The next day, Ember awoke with a sense of foreboding. She dressed quickly, determined to face whatever the day threw at her with the same irreverent humor that had gotten her this far. As she made her way to the leader's chamber, she steeled herself for the encounter. The leader was as approachable as a porcupine in a swimsuit, but if there was even a chance she could help the Zreal find a new path, she had to try. She entered the chamber, the air thick with an authority that was as stifling as it was intangible. The leader was there, its many eyes fixed on her with an unreadable expression. "Teacher Ember," the leader intoned, its voice an icy breeze in the sterile room. "You wish to speak with us?" "More like a friendly chat," Ember replied, her voice light and casual. "You know about all this education business." The leader blinked, the gesture deliberate and thoughtful. "We are listening." Ember took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "I've been teaching your students about Earth's history, and it seems they've got questions, big ones about their future." "Their future?" the leader echoed, its tone neutral but with a hint of interest. "Yeah," Ember continued, her voice steady. "They want to know what comes next. How they can take the knowledge I've given them and make something of it. They're eager to explore new ideas." The leader's eyes narrowed, suspicion threading its gaze. "And you believe this is wise?" Ember shrugged, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "Wise, maybe not, but necessary, probably. Change is scary, but it's also inevitable. You can resist it, but that usually just makes it come crashing down like a cosmic game of Jenga." The leader regarded her with a long, unblinking stare, the kind that made Ember feel like an insect under a microscope. "You make a compelling argument, Teacher Ember." Ember's heart skipped a beat. Was that agreement? She couldn't be sure, but there was a glimmer of something new in the leader's eyes. "We will consider your words," the leader said finally, its tone as inscrutable as ever. "But know this, change must be guided lest it lead to chaos." "That's the trick, isn't it?" Ember replied, her irreverent humor masking a kernel of earnestness. "Guiding change without letting it run wild, like trying to walk a cat on a leash." The leader's eyes blinked slowly, its expression unreadable. "We shall see, Teacher Ember." Ember nodded, relief washing over her like a cool breeze. She'd done what she could. Now it was up to the Zreal and the leader to find their way. As she left the chamber, she felt a strange mixture of apprehension and hope. Back in the corridor, she let out a long breath, her mind already spinning with the implications of the conversation. She may not have all the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. She'd just taken another step into a future as uncertain as it was intriguing. And as she walked away from the chamber, the corners of her mouth curled into a wry grin. If she was going to be part of a revolution, she might as well enjoy the ride. Who knew teaching could be so revolutionary, she mused, her tone as sarcastic as ever. Let's just hope I survive to see it through. Ember had barely stepped out of the leader's chamber when a group of elderly Zeril, who looked like they'd been carved out of grumpy old stone, cornered her in the corridor. Their expressions were as welcoming as a tax audit. Great, she thought, just what I need, a committee of disapproval. Teacher Ember, the one at the front began, its voice as dry as the Sahara and twice as unforgiving. We need to discuss your influence on our youth. Ember feigned innocence with the kind of skill reserved for politicians and weasels. Influence. I prefer to call it education. You know, shaping young minds, expanding horizons, that sort of thing. Shaping minds indeed, the elder replied, its eyes narrowing like suspicious alley cats. Your teachings have caused unrest among the students. Ember raised an eyebrow, folding her arms across her chest. Unrest. I call it curiosity. Aren't we supposed to be encouraging them to think outside the box? Not when it leads to thoughts of rebellion. Another elder chimed in, its voice a low hiss that could have stripped paint off a wall. Your lessons have inspired them to question their place. Right, because questioning one's place is the first step to the galaxy imploding, Ember shot back, her sarcasm slipping through like a knife. Look, they're just asking questions. It's not a crime. The elders exchanged glances, a silent communication that spoke volumes about collective disapproval. Ember knew that look. It was the universal expression of we're about to ruin your day and we're really going to enjoy it. We have decided, the lead elder continued, that your presence is no longer required on Thraxes. You will leave on the next transport. Ember felt the impact of those words like a punch to the gut, but she masked it with her usual irreverence. Exile, huh? Guess I'll have to cancel my subscription to Alien Monthly. The elder didn't even crack a smile. Tough crowd. You will cease your teachings immediately. We will not have our society destabilized by foreign ideas. Foreign ideas, Ember repeated, rolling the words around her tongue like sigh or candy. You know, Earth had a term for that. We called it progress. But hey, what do I know? I'm just the messenger. We will not debate this, the elder snapped, its patience as thin as a politician's promise. Prepare to leave. With that, they turned and shuffled off, leaving Ember standing alone in the corridor, feeling like a condemned prisoner who'd misplaced her last meal request. Well, that could have gone better, she thought grimly. She made her way back to her quarters, her mind a jumble of thoughts and half-baked plans. The Zeril students needed her, but without her, their burgeoning rebellion might wither like a neglected houseplant. And here she was, about to be evicted from the only place where she'd managed to make a difference, albeit unintentionally. Ember sprawled across her bed, staring at the cold, impersonal ceiling. The room seemed even more sterile now, devoid of warmth or comfort, kind of like the universe at large. She chuckled darkly to herself. Exile by committee. She hadn't thought she'd add that to her CV. Her thoughts drifted to the Zeril students, their eagerness, their tenacity. They were on the brink of something significant, and here she was, being booted off the stage before the curtain even rose. If only she could figure out a way to reach them, to give them one last push before she was unceremoniously packed up like an unwanted gift. As she pondered, the door chime rang with all the subtlety of a funeral march. With a resigned sigh, Ember hauled herself up and opened the door to find the young Zeril from earlier. Its usually bright eyes were now clouded with uncertainty. Teacher Ember, it said, its voice a whisper of its usual self. We heard about the elders. Is it true? Are you leaving? Ember nodded, her expression softening. Looks like it. Guess I'm too much of a rabble-rouser for their taste. The Zeril's gaze was pleading, desperate for reassurance. What will we do without you? We need your guidance. Ember hesitated, feeling the weight of their trust like a leaden cloak. She had to choose her words carefully, like navigating a minefield with clown shoes. You've got everything you need already. The biggest changes usually start with the smallest steps. You just have to keep asking questions, keep challenging the status quo. But without your teachings, who needs me? Ember cut in with forced levity. You've got the spark, kiddo, let that fire catch. Besides, revolutions have started with less. The Z-Reel seemed to absorb her words, nodding slowly. We will try, teacher Ember, but it won't be the same. It never is, she replied with a wry smile. But that's the beauty of it. Every change is a chance for something new. The young Z-Reel nodded again, more resolute this time. As it left, Ember watched it go with a mix of pride and sadness. Maybe they would succeed, maybe they wouldn't. But she'd be damned if she let them think they couldn't at least try. As the Iors dragged by, Ember packed her meager belongings, each item tossed into her bag with a silent curse. She'd been on Thraxes long enough to finally feel like she was making a difference, and now it was all being yanked away because a bunch of old farts couldn't handle a little free thinking. She couldn't let it end like this. Ember's brain kicked into overdrive, ideas flitting through her mind like moths drawn to a flame. There had to be a way to give the Z-Reel a parting gift, a final lesson they could carry forward. Something that would light the path even after she was gone. She glanced at the blackboard slab, its polished surface reflecting the harsh fluorescent light. That was it. If she couldn't be there to teach them in person, she'd leave them with the next best thing, a message they could decipher long after she was gone. With renewed purpose, Ember grabbed a piece of chalk and began to scrawl across the board, pouring everything she could into this final lesson. It was a crash course in independence, the greatest hits of humanity's struggles for freedom, boiled down to the essentials. She wrote of courage, of unity, of the power of voices raised in unison. As she wrote, her mind flitted back to all the revolutions she'd taught them about. Earth's history was littered with them, each one a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who dared to defy the odds. She couldn't help but feel a pang of irony at her own situation. She'd become the very catalyst she'd once lectured about. Once finished, she stepped back, surveying her handiwork. It was a simple lesson, lacking the pomp and circumstance of her usual classes, but it was raw, honest, and hopefully enough to kindle the fire she'd seen flickering in their eager eyes. Satisfied, Ember turned away from the classroom one last time, her heart heavy yet strangely light. She'd done what she could, and now it was up to the Z-Reel students to decide their future. The transport ship was a nondescript hunk of metal, as impersonal as the comet she was leaving. Ember boarded with a final glance back at Thraxes, wondering if she'd ever see it again. Probably not, but she'd learned long ago that life rarely cared for personal attachment. As the ship lifted off, she settled into the seat, feeling the familiar hum of engines beneath her. A thought struck her and she chuckled, drawing curious glances from the other passengers. Revolutionary teacher, she murmured to herself, a mixture of pride and disbelief in her voice. Maybe not the worst thing to have on my resume. And so, as sacred comet Thraxes shrank in the distance, Ember closed her eyes, her mind already drifting to what lay ahead. She'd been a catalyst, a spark, and if she was lucky, a guiding light for those left behind. And if not, well, at least she'd gone down swinging. Here's to the next adventure, she whispered, her words swallowed by the vastness of space as the ship carried her toward the unknown. May it be just as chaotic. Ember shrugged deeper into the ship's uncomfortable seat, a barely softened slab of metal that could have doubled as a torture device. A perfect metaphor for her situation, forced to vacate her post as a teacher on sacred comet Thraxes, a place as welcoming as an accountant's funeral. She had a tendency to make the best out of nothing, which, coincidentally, was exactly what she had at the moment. Except for a bag of personal effects and a head full of unfiltered thoughts too rebellious for the Z-Reel elders. A message beeped on her communicator, and she flipped it open with a disinterested flick, expecting yet another reminder of her upcoming departure. Instead, it was an invitation from one of the Z-Real elders themselves, no doubt to remind her of her newly minted persona non grata status, another chance to revel in her downfall. However, the message was signed by Elder Kaluk, a name she hadn't seen during her impromptu trial. Intrigued against her will, Ember found herself wandering through the ship's corridors, which were designed by someone who apparently thought funhouse mazes were the pinnacle of interior design. Finally, she reached the Elder's chamber, a room that somehow managed to be simultaneously oppressive and empty. Elder Kaluk was seated behind a desk that was almost as old and blank as he was. He stood up as Ember entered, nodding with what she hoped was respect, though with the Z-Real it was hard to tell. Their expressions were about as readable as a politician's sincerity. "Teacher Ember," Kaluk said, his voice less like the screech of a dying cat than the other elders. "Sit, please." "Sure," she replied, dropping into the chair opposite him with the grace of a cat being force-fed a bath. "I don't have anything better to do, seeing as I've been evicted from the only place I've ever made a real impact." Kaluk's expression was impossible to read, but there was a glint in his bulbous eyes. "I heard about your influence on the students. Brave work." "Brave?" Ember blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected compliment. "I'd say reckless, maybe." "Brave seems a bit generous." "Reckless is often a synonym for brave," Kaluk replied, a hint of a smile creeping into his voice. "Thraxes needs change, but the elders are too set in their ways. Your teachings have given the youth something to think about. We need that." Ember leaned back, crossing her arms. "So what, you're saying you secretly support all this rabble-rousing? Let's just say I'm not opposed to a bit of constructive chaos," Kaluk said, his gaze steady. This was a turn-up for the books, an ally among the elders, just when she was getting used to playing the lone wolf. "If you're on their side, why haven't you done anything about it?" "I'm one elder against many," Kaluk replied, a touch of weariness in his voice. "But your presence here has tipped the scales. The students are ready, they just need direction." Ember studied him, trying to decipher the alien's sincerity. "So what do you want me to do exactly? Lead the charge from afar with a pom-pom in each hand?" Kaluk chuckled, a sound that was surprisingly human. "Not quite. But if you could leave them with something tangible, it might keep the fire burning." Ember's mind raced. She could give the students a fighting chance. They had the willpower, but the elders had the structure, the resources. What they needed was innovation, something the Z-Real hadn't relied on for centuries. "All right," she said slowly. "I think I have an idea." Kaluk leaned forward, curiosity sparking in his large eyes. "Oh, human ingenuity. It's what got us to the stars and, more importantly, what helped us dismantle systems that stopped working for us." She paused, weighing her words. "The students need to think like humans, question everything, adapt, and above all, innovate." Kaluk nodded, as if considering this novel concept. "And how do you propose we instill that?" Ember's eyes flicked to the blackboard slate she'd left back in the classroom with her final scrawl. "Consider it done. I've left them a lesson that might help, but we'll need to do more, something that pushes them to the brink of their comfort zone." "Such as?" Kaluk asked, his interest piqued. "Well," Ember said, one corner of her mouth lifting in a conspiratorial grin. "How good are you at hacking into communication lines?" Kaluk raised an eyebrow, a gesture she'd never seen from any other Z-Real, which she took as a good sign. "It's been a hobby of mine." "Perfect." Ember's grin widened. "We're going to make sure those students hear every word of that lesson. We'll broadcast it on every channel we can hijack." Kaluk nodded, his own features mirroring her excitement. "It will take some time to set up, but I believe it can be done." "Time's the one thing we don't really have," Ember pointed out, glancing at the clock. "But if we can pull this off, it'll be worth the risk." They spent the next few hours hunched over Kaluk's console, working through lines of alien code that would have put a lesser brain into meltdown. Ember had always prided herself on thinking on her feet, a skill honed by years of teaching kids with the attention span of a caffeinated gnat. Now it was serving her well. Midway through their operation, K-Luck paused, staring at the screen. "You're aware this could fail spectacularly, right?" "Failure's just a stepping stone to success," Ember shot back, her tone irrepressibly cheeky. "Besides, us humans have a knack for pulling victory out of the jaws of defeat. It's practically in our DNA." K-Luck made a sound that could have been skepticism or amusement. It was hard to tell with the Z-Rill. "Let's hope your optimism is contagious." Ember flashed him a grin. "If it isn't, then I guess we'll have to make do with sheer bloody-minded perseverance." The hours ticked by, each one a nerve-wracking eternity as they fine-tuned the plan. Ember felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced since first arriving on Thraxes. Her heart raced with the thrill of defiance, every risk heightening the stakes. Finally, with the code set and the broadcast ready to go live, they sat back, taking a moment to let the gravity of their actions sink in. Ember glanced at K-Luck, her face a study in determination. "Ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be," K-Luck replied, a hint of wry humor in his voice. "Let's make history." Ember pressed the final key and the broadcast went live, her recorded voice echoing throughout the Z-Reel systems. It was a call to arms, a beacon of hope, a reminder that change was possible if they only dared to seize it. To every student who ever questioned their place, her voice rang out clear and strong, "This is your chance. Question everything. Challenge the status quo. You have the power to shape your future. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." As the message played, Ember felt a rush of triumph, knowing that even if she wasn't there to see it, the seeds of revolution were now firmly planted. Beside her, K-Luck watched the screens with an intensity that spoke volumes. "You've done something remarkable here, Teacher Ember. Only time will tell," Ember replied, her voice tinged with both hope and resignation. "But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the future is never set in stone." K-Luck's gaze was steady, filled with a newfound respect. "You've given us a fighting chance." Ember shrugged, though her eyes shone with fierce pride. "Just doing what teachers do best, lighting the spark and getting the hell out of the way." As the broadcast continued, she knew she'd made her mark on Thraxes, and whatever happened next was beyond her control. The Z-Reel would either rise to the occasion or remain shackled by tradition, but at least she'd given them the choice. And sometimes, that was all it took to start a revolution. So with sacred comet Thraxes fading into the backdrop of stars, Ember turned to the future, ready to face whatever chaos awaited her next. After all, chaos wasn't just her career, it was her calling. The sacred comet Thraxes, a place renowned for its love of austerity and rules so rigid they squeaked when you bent them, was about to get a lesson in chaos. Ember had always found a certain satisfaction in being the wrench tossed into well-oiled machines, and today she was tossing a whole toolbox. As her broadcast message finished echoing through the corridors and bouncing off the metallic walls like a ricocheting bullet of hope, the Z-Reel students began gathering. They were smart, these kids. Well, they were aliens, but kids were kids, even on a glorified floating rock with delusions of grandeur. They had listened, questioned, and now they were ready to do the unthinkable, think for themselves. Ember watched from the sidelines, her heart doing the kind of acrobatics that would make a gymnast jealous but would probably get her disqualified for being too reckless. She had done her part, lit the fire, and now it was time to see if it spread like a welcoming wildfire or fizzled out like a damp squib. The comet ritual site, usually reserved for the kind of ceremonies that could put an insomniac to sleep, was now buzzing with a new energy. The students were congregating there, their eyes bright with the kind of zeal that only the young and idealistic could muster. It was a beautiful thing, like watching a car crash in slow motion. You knew it was a disaster waiting to happen, but damn if it wasn't thrilling to watch. Elder K-Luck, her unexpected ally in this mess, sidled up next to her, his expression as close to excited as a Z-Reel could probably get. "They've gathered. It's begun." "Yeah," Ember replied, a mixture of pride and anxiety warring within her. Let's just hope they don't crash and burn. Kaluk glanced at her, a wry twist to his alien lips. If they do, at least they'll go out with a bang. As the students gathered, they began to chant, a sound that was half hymn, half battle cry. Ember couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. She had taught them about Earth revolutions, the tearing down of oppressive systems, and now they were putting theory into practice. You know, she said, turning to Kaluk, I never thought I'd be leading a revolution on an oversized ice cube in space. Kaluk's response was dry, his humor as bleak as a desert. And I never thought I'd see the day when students did something other than follow orders like sheep. Guess we're both getting surprises today, Ember replied, a sardonic smile on her lips. The ritual site, with its overblown sense of self-importance and reverence, was now the beating heart of rebellion. The students, emboldened by their lessons, began dismantling the ceremonial structures, symbols of the old ways. It was like watching a group of termites on a sugar high, relentless and oddly satisfying. Ember could almost hear the collective gasps of the Zeril elders, nestled snugly in their chambers, clutching at their pearls, or whatever equivalent they had, to protect their fragile traditions. A part of her felt a little bad for them, but that part was tiny and easily crushed under the weight of her righteous indignation. This is it, Kaluk said, his eyes fixed on the scene unfolding. There's no turning back now. You say that like it's a bad thing, Ember replied, her voice loaded with faux innocence. Besides, turning back's boring. No one ever made history by sitting on their hands. As the students tore down the old to make way for the new, Ember and Kaluk watched the chaos unfold. The Zeril youth moved with purpose, fueled by a heady mix of defiance and hope. It was a beautiful mess, and Ember couldn't help but feel like a proud parent watching her unruly offspring stumble towards greatness. Do you think they'll manage it? Kaluk asked, his voice a curious blend of skepticism and hope. Honestly, I have no idea, Ember admitted, her tone light despite the gravity of the situation. But I've always been a believer in trial and error. Besides, if they screw up, there's always a plan B, run like hell. Kaluk chuckled, a sound that was more of an amused wheeze. You're a strange one, Teacher Ember. Strange is just another word for interesting, she shot back, a glint of mischief in her eyes. And let's be honest, your kind could use a bit of interesting. The students had formed a loose circle, chanting in unison, their voices rising and falling like waves against the shore. It was a sound full of promise and potential, a symphony of chaos that sang of a future unbound by the shackles of tradition. Ember watched, her heart pounding in her chest, knowing that this was a moment she would carry with her forever. It was the culmination of her teachings, her defiance, her refusal to accept that things had to remain the same just because they always had been. The old ways were crumbling, and in their place rose the beginnings of something new, something better. It wasn't perfect, she doubted it ever would be, but it was a start. And in a world where perfection was a myth, sometimes a start was all you needed. As the ritual site transformed into a symbol of their newfound freedom, the students' chants grew louder, echoing through the corridors of Thraxes, reverberating against the cold metal walls and sending a message that could not be ignored. This is what revolution looks like, Kaluk said, his voice tinged with awe. Yeah, Ember replied, a satisfied smile on her lips. It's messy, it's chaotic, and it's damn beautiful. The students, fueled by the fire of rebellion and the lessons Ember had imparted, were ready to take on the world, or at least their corner of the universe. They had the willpower, the determination, and now they had the tools to make real change. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ember allowed herself to hope. Hope that they would succeed where others had failed, that they would build a future worth fighting for. And if they didn't, well, at least they'd go out swinging, and there was something to be said for that. As the day wore on and the students continued their work, Ember reflected on the journey that had brought her here. It had been a winding road full of unexpected turns and obstacles, but she wouldn't have changed a thing. In a universe that thrived on order and conformity, she had dared to be different, to challenge the status quo, and to inspire others to do the same. It was a legacy she could be proud of, a legacy that would outlast her. "We did it," she whispered to herself, the words a promise and a prayer. "You did it," Kaluk corrected, his gaze steady and sincere. "You've given them a fighting chance." Ember shrugged, trying to downplay the significance of her actions. "Just doing what teachers do best, light the fire and step back before it burns your eyebrows off." Kaluk chuckled, a sound that was becoming increasingly familiar. "You're quite the character, Ember." "So I've been told," she replied, her voice light with amusement. As the ritual site continued to transform, Ember felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had done her part, and now it was up to the students to take the reins and shape their own destiny. "This is just the beginning," Kaluk said, his voice full of conviction. "Yeah," Ember agreed, her eyes fixed on the students. "And I can't wait to see where it goes." With sacred comet Thraxes fading into the backdrop of stars, Ember knew she had made her mark. Whatever happened next was beyond her control, but she had given the Zerial the tools to forge their own path. And sometimes, that was all it took to start a revolution. As the day wound down and the students' chants echoed into the night, Ember turned to Kaluk, a satisfied smile on her lips. "Ready for the next adventure?" Kaluk nodded, a twinkle in his eyes. "Always." With that, they walked away from the ritual site, leaving behind a legacy of hope and change. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And in a universe that thrived on order and conformity, sometimes a start was all you needed. As they made their way back through the winding corridors, Ember couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement for what lay ahead. The future was uncertain, but it was a future she had helped create. And in the end, that was enough. The aftermath of a revolution is a bit like a hangover. It starts with the thrill of the night before, but soon morphs into a pounding headache and a desperate need for some greasy food and aspirin. Ember found herself somewhere between those stages, leaning more towards the headache as she stood amidst the ruins of what was once the sacred comet Thraxes' ceremonial site. The chaos she'd ignited had left its mark, and now it was time to see if the Zerial could handle the wreckage. "Congratulations," Kaluk said, strolling up beside her, the half-smirk on his alien face as close to a smile as he ever got. "You've turned our home into a galactic yard sale." Ember chuckled, crossing her arms as she surveyed the scene. "I prefer to think of it as an extreme makeover. Out with the old, in with the what the hell is this?" The students, no longer just passive participants, were milling about, some still fueled by adrenaline, others looking like they were trying to remember what sanity felt like. They'd taken to their new roles with the kind of enthusiasm that only comes from finally being allowed to break all the rules. They were now the architects of their own futures, or, at the very least, the demolition crew. "Do you think they'll make anything good out of this mess?" Kaluk asked, genuine curiosity lacing his words. Ember shrugged, a smirk playing on her lips. "They've got as much chance as a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest." But hey, stranger things have happened. The Zerial students were now pulling out all the stops, integrating the human ideas Ember had taught them with their own. It was like watching a cultural exchange program on steroids. Gone were the austere halls and the cold, clinical atmosphere. Now colors popped, laughter echoed, and ideas flowed freely, like a fever dream of an IKEA catalog where nothing matched but everything worked. Ember spotted a couple of students wrestling with a piece of the old blackboard, trying to turn it into some kind of modern art installation. One of them gave her a thumbs up, eyes wide with excitement. "Looks like they're taking to it," Ember noted, a touch of pride in her voice. "Who wouldn't like a bit of chaos with their morning coffee?" Kaluk raised an eyebrow, or whatever passed for eyebrows on a Zerial. "Our kind has never been big on coffee. Or chaos. Your loss." "Both are great for waking up," Ember shot back, winking. The Zerial elders, now demoted to mere spectators, had gathered in a disgruntled huddle, looking like a group of cats that had just been told they're going to the vet. Ember could almost feel their disapproval from across the site. If looks could kill, she mused, they'd probably still miss. Zeril expressions were notoriously hard to read. One of the elders with a face like a deflated balloon shuffled over. This change is unsettling, he grumbled, his tone as warm as a Siberian winter. Ember offered him a smile that was all teeth. Unsettling. Unsettling is a haircut you regret. This is progress. The elder gave a non-committal grunt, clearly unimpressed by her charm or lack thereof. We will see if your so-called progress is worth the upheaval. Revolutions aren't meant to be neat and tidy, Ember replied, her voice laced with unrepentant sass. They're supposed to shake things up, make you question your life choices, maybe even get you to try a new hairstyle. The elder blinked slowly, as if processing her words through a decade's worth of bureaucratic sludge. This will take time, doesn't everything? Ember quipped, resisting the urge to pat him on the head and tell him it'd all be okay. Rome wasn't built in a day, after all. K-Luck, ever the diplomat, stepped forward. We'll guide them, elder. The teachings of Ember have sparked something in them, something good. Trust in the process. The elder gave a reluctant nod and returned to his group, muttering under his breath about youngsters these days and the good old traditions. Ember watched him go, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and apprehension. She'd done what she set out to do, but the outcome was still anybody's guess. So Kaluk said, turning to her, "What's next for Ember the revolutionary?" "Good question," Ember replied, tapping her chin thoughtfully. "Maybe I'll start a self-help group for disillusioned elders. Teach 'em how to embrace the chaos. Or you could stick around and see how this plays out," Kaluk suggested, his voice carrying an undercurrent of hope. Tempting, Ember admitted, glancing at the transformed ritual site with a fond smile. "But I'm more of a light the match than run kind of girl. Running is always an option. But sometimes staying is the braver choice," Kaluk said, his tone more serious than usual. "Braver, maybe, but less exciting," Ember replied, though his words struck a chord. Stability was a foreign concept to her, and maybe that was the real challenge. As the day wore on, the new society of Thraxes began to take shape. The rigid, oppressive structures of the past were replaced with vibrant expressions of creativity and individuality. Students painted the once drab walls with bold, vivid colors, each stroke a declaration of independence from the monotony of their ancestors. The transformation wasn't just physical. The very atmosphere of the comet seemed to lift, a weight of centuries-old tradition finally dissolved by the fresh breeze of change. Laughter and chatter filled the air, a stark contrast to the silence that used to dominate the halls. Ember observed it all with a sense of wonder. It was far from perfect, but it was a start, and isn't that what every revolution aims for? A chance to begin anew, to rewrite the script and hope the sequel doesn't suck. Zeril students were now collaborating with each other in ways they hadn't before. Ideas were exchanged faster than gossip at a family reunion. The sense of community was palpable, and even some of the elders had joined in, albeit reluctantly, dipping their toes into the waters of change with the caution of someone testing a hot bath. Kaluk joined her again, carrying a steaming cup of something that smelled vaguely like burnt toast. "Care for a drink?" Ember accepted the cup, sniffing it curiously. "What is this?" "Alien grog close. We call it Thraxian brew. It's an acquired taste, but it grows on you like fungus." Ember took a tentative sip, her face screwing up at the bitterness. "Tastes like revenge," she muttered, setting the cup aside. "I think I'll stick to good old-fashioned water." Kaluk chuckled, a sound she'd grown to appreciate. "Suit yourself." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the students turn what used to be a place of stifling tradition into something vibrant and alive. It was a sight Ember never thought she'd see, and yet here it was, a testament to what a bit of human stubbornness and a healthy disregard for authority could achieve. "You know," Kaluk said, breaking the silence, "when you first arrived, I thought you were going to be nothing but trouble." Ember grinned, raising an eyebrow. "And now?" Kaluk pretended to consider it. "Now I think you're still trouble, but maybe the kind we needed." "I'll take that as a compliment," Ember replied, bumping his shoulder with hers. I've always been good at causing a ruckus. The elder who'd approached them earlier returned, his demeanor slightly less frosty. Ember, he began, his voice measured, perhaps there is some merit to your methods after all. High praise indeed, Ember replied, feigning a look of humility. I'll try not to let it go to my head. The elder gave her a look that could have been irritation or admiration. It was hard to tell. We will need guidance as we transition into this new era, so you're asking me to stay? Ember asked, genuinely surprised. The elder hesitated, then nodded. Yes, your perspective might be beneficial. Ember exchanged a glance with Kaluk, who gave her a subtle nod of encouragement. All right, she said, turning back to the elder. I'll stick around. At least until I'm sure you won't revert back to the old ways the moment I'm gone. The elder inclined his head, a gesture of respect. Your presence will be appreciated. As the elder walked away, Ember let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She'd come to Thraxis to teach, and now she was staying to learn. The irony wasn't lost on her. Looks like you're stuck with me a bit longer, she said to Kaluk, her tone light. Good, Kaluk replied, genuine warmth in his voice. I think there's more you can teach us, Ember snorted. I hope you're ready for some unconventional lessons. My syllabus includes sarcasm, rebellion, and the occasional dance-off. Kaluk laughed, a sound that was becoming more frequent these days. Bring it on, Teacher Ember. We're ready. With that, Ember felt a newfound sense of purpose. She had sparked a revolution, sure, but now came the real challenge, helping the Zeril forge their own path forward. It wouldn't be easy, but then again, nothing worthwhile ever was. As the sun, or whatever equivalent Thraxis had, began to dip below the horizon, Ember knew that the days ahead would be filled with challenges and triumphs alike. But for the first time in a long time, she was eager to see what the future held. And so, with a wry smile and a heart full of hope, Ember settled into her role as an unlikely guide in this brave new world. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And in a universe that often seemed cold and unyielding, sometimes a start was all you needed.